Thursday, 4th of July 2013, interview with Hilary Lawson. Okay, my first question then, Hilary, is how did you first get involved with the WEA?
Well, I think we go back to 1983 or 4, and I'd heard through the grapevine that the WEA was coming to the Highlands, and at that point I read initially about the organisation because it was new to me. I hadn't been in the UK that long, and from the moment my eyes read the paper on what the WEA and its rich heritage of providing, I guess, learning for social purpose and for personal development and its links with the labour movement, I was very excited, and I thought I really want to be involved with this organisation. At the time I was teaching for the Open University on a part-time basis, and I really enjoyed that, but I could see the face-to-face group work and the fact it was student-centred and you built a curriculum around the interests of your learners really appealed to me. So I got in touch and went along actually to an AGM, and before I knew it I was on the committee, and before I knew that, for one reason or another, I was chair. Honest, I didn't push it, but there was a vacancy, shall we say. And so I just really went from that point, and I suppose I taught the odd course over the years, but that was my initial involvement until David Alston, who was the tutor organiser, until he managed to achieve funding for a development education project. And he said to me, would you like to work 5 hours a week? I had small children at the time, and I thought I could just about handle 5 hours a week. Mm-hmm. I had a passionate interest in development education, having spent time in Africa. It had come about because the Lomé conference had been taking place in Edinburgh, which is a meeting of southern countries' interests. And David decided to organise a People's Lomé conference here in the Highlands. And we began to see on that day the number of common threads linking the Third World, as we called it then, with the Highlands. The central role women had played in communities when men were often away at sea or oil or whatever. The role development played, the boom and bust economy, the distance from the centre, etc. So, to cut a long story short, David was very good at finding funding and found some funding from Oxfam, and that was the start of the Development Education Project, and I guess really my first paid employment with the organisation.
Can you remember which year that was?
I think that was, I can remember it by age of children, and I think that would be 1985.
About 85?
I think so.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, I think you answered the first two questions there. But perhaps specifically the second question was the tutor organiser job. What was it that attracted you to that?
Well, prior to the job being advertised, David Alston had gone on a kind of sabbatical. He'd wanted to spend 6 months in Ross and Cromarty setting up the Cromarty Museum. And this would have been about 1988, I think, something like that. And so I applied and was accepted to work on a half-time basis, filling the role of tutor organiser. And I shared that with Michael Gregson. Two of us were in the job.
I'd forgotten that. Yes.
Way back.
And
yes. We had a wee shoebox of an office in the Inverness Business Centre. Mm-hmm. And by then we had Sue Kerr as our administrator.
Right, okay.
So it goes back that far. And so that was for 6 months. And David came back from setting up the museum, which we know went on to be highly successful, and said, I think I'm leaving the WEA. So the post was advertised. And by then it might have been 1990. And I thought, oh well, yes, I'd like to apply for it, but on a part-time basis. And I found somebody who would want to job share. And so we put in our applications, and the week of the interviews, she came to me, my potential job share partner, and said, I'm sorry, I've got another job. I want to work full-time. So I was left with the decision, do I abandon trying to work for the WEA as tutor organizer, or do I give it a go and go in full-time for a year and just see how I was to go, because it was a new venture. It meant travelling at least in Ross-shire and Inverness. I had small children. I went for the interview, and to my delight I was selected, and if that was 1990, I didn't look back till 2008.
As we know. Okay. You've partly answered the next question about how WEA in Highland was started. You've said who was involved and something about the organisation supporting it. Do you have anything more to say about that?
Yes. When the WEA was mooted to come to the Highlands, we were part of the North of Scotland district at that point,
yes,
which was based in Aberdeen. And Alan Ree, who'd been a tutor organiser, or certainly a well-known tutor, he was given the task of coming to Highland ahead of David Alston's appointment and stirring up interest, which he did very effectively. And by the time David was hired to be in post, there were already kind of budding groups of which became the branch committees.
Right.
So that all happened. It was made possible, the expansion into Highland, because of two pots of funding right from those early days. One was Highland Council Community Education. They could see that the WEA style of learning, the content of the classes, and just the value of having an organisation with such a strong pedigree as the WEA in the Highlands would be a good thing. So Jim Morrison, who was head of community education, said he would put in half the funding for the post if the Highlands and Islands Development Board put in the other half. So that's how, I think maybe, I don't know, they might have given 3-year funding or something, but it was enough to launch the WEA here.
Okay. Fine, so that's the funding initially when we got started. And again, in those early days, where were your main students? Where did they come from, and the courses you put on?
I think because I was a voluntary member at that point when David was first in post, I think we were at that point, because we didn't have pots of money, we were restricted to probably Easter Ross and Inverness itself as locations for the courses. I would say from the word go, there was a good balance of liberal arts, or you might call learning for life kinds of courses, alongside what became known as pre-vocational, or courses which would build confidence and skills. So the two strands were embedded within the WEA life right from the word go. And the advantage of the liberal arts provision was that it often spawned committee members. I believe yourself, or maybe you came in as a tutor, but it was an active hunting ground for potential committee members. And it was very important in the Highlands because we didn't have a university. Aberdeen did extramural talks, but they were one-offs, lectures. So there wasn't an opportunity where students could work with a tutor to develop a curriculum. And really from those first days we had things like local history, creative writing, and then as time went on we had film, archaeology, philosophical inquiry, rural tourism, assertiveness, you name it. But the great thing was the branch committees always were very involved in deciding the subject matter.
Yes. Well, I can remember that, yes. And also the branch committees reported back. They often attended the courses and reported back, so there was a two-way...
There was a two-way, dialogue. And Anne, yourself, thank you very much. From your early involvement, you were very involved in helping us to evaluate and to gain feedback from learners as to what they wanted, what they'd enjoyed, how we could improve things, the subject matter of future courses. So I do think we kept a fairly close touch on the kinds of subject matter people wanted. And I remember one particular course brought in a lot of committee members, and that was philosophical inquiry. Mm-hmm. I do think it added, well, let's say, an enlightened element to some of our committee meetings, since they would use the same approach that they did in their classes as to some of the committee issues. But it was great, because we certainly had 3 or 4 that came because they were excited at that novel way of learning and of stimulation. And also I remember them saying, what we learn in this class about an approach to inquiring about issues, we can take and integrate into the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. So I think for some of them attending that class, it was very liberating and almost life-changing. Yeah. And they certainly felt a loyalty to WEA, and some of them carried on for years, as we know, on the committee.
Yes.
But the same, we're just now talking about Inverness, but North Highland, we always had 2 branches, and then they became 2 local associations, one in Inverness and one in East Ross, which was called North Highland. And they were very distinctive. And
I was going to ask, what was the difference between them?
I guess Inverness has always been a larger centre with maybe slightly less local identity. You bring in people from a variety of strands. You might get professionals working in the field who would join our committee, somebody from the college or somebody from a guidance organisation. So they would help inform what we were doing. Whereas in North Highland, we were more likely to have representatives of small communities who were very closely linked to activities in their communities and needs of potential learners. So it had a more local focus.
Yes.
And the local history or the local archaeology very much reflected the areas in which it took place. So maybe I'm not explaining that very well, but one had a more local focus, where Inverness was always a regional centre.
Yes. Okay. You've talked about the subjects that were chosen in what we'd call the liberal side. On the more vocational side of the courses we did, how did those come about? From the word go, we had confidence building courses, or I'll call them carry-on learning courses. And this we owe so much to our colleagues in Aberdeen, who really created groundbreaking daytime provision, largely for women, that was student-centred, that dealt with a lot of personal development issues, society issues, cultural issues that women wanted to explore and see where that took them. Sometimes it was the media. So there was a kind of analysis of the world in which they lived and how they might make changes and how they might be involved. They were very powerful courses. So we drew from their experience in Aberdeen and developed a nucleus of that kind of program here. Okay. So what we're talking about is the other side of the courses we did, apart from the liberal.
And just to recap, although hopefully it's on the tape, we talked about building on the very exciting curriculum that was developed in Aberdeen called Carry On Learning.
Yes.
And that allowed participants, who were largely women, I have to say, the chance to explore and reflect and analyse their own lives and find out about issues that mattered to them. So we did have that program. Before long it became apparent, and we're talking now the early 90s, that a lot of women, I mean not all of them, but some of them had been home with children, a lot of them had been out of the workforce for quite a while, and they really lacked confidence and perhaps understanding of where to look for employment or further learning or how to volunteer. So our flagship course called Options and Choices was soon very popular, and I think one year we might have had 10 different courses in 10 different communities.
Yes.
And throughout Ross-shire and Inverness, and they were very open-ended. They followed the interests of the learners, the tutors guided, and at the end of the day they were able to get accredited SQA unit for them. And so I think we've got in our archives a lot of evidence of 1993, 5, 6, 7 Women's Days, where we brought all these learners together.
And you said Inverness, but as I remembered it, we also had courses in Nairn.
Nairn, we had, like I say, about 10 communities brought throughout Ross-shire, Allness, Invergordon, Tain, Ballantor, Dingwall, you name it.
Can you remember south of Inverness?
We didn't particularly go south of Inverness, to be honest. It was only
Nairn, was it?
It was Nairn. No, I mean, once we got European funding, we were able to go to Aviemore.
Yes.
And Granton and places. But Inverness was a big enough hunting ground at that point. We had 3 or 4, Culloden, Merkinch, Hilton, maybe Spectrum Centre. So there was a variety of Inverness locations.
First stage.
Yes.
And the funding for those courses?
Yeah, well, we were lucky. It was the advent really of the local enterprise companies, and while they called their remit training, they were prepared to look at something they termed, and we agreed to, call pre-vocational. So we would argue that in order for people to take up employment or to gain the appropriate skills for whatever jobs were available, they had to first feel entitlement, and they had to feel confident, and self-esteem had to be high, and they had to know where to look. So our job was to signpost, to create an environment which they could blossom. That's all it took, because they were such capable individuals, and without much effort, really, we were able to create a wonderful momentum.
Yeah.
And so these learning days were fabulous, and there'd be 80 women coming on 4 buses and congregating.
Yes.
They were absolute nightmares to organise.
Yes.
But they were so rewarding.
Yeah.
And they were very good, and it's just fun looking at the workshops that were provided. The internet was a brand new thing, so we would bring in, we didn't even have laptops, we'd bring in 5 PCs, can you imagine, and set them up, or confidence building or whatever. So that was great. From that basis, we then got a bit bolder and went for European funding, because we could also see that 2 hours a week was fine, but really, what could you do if you had 15 hours a week? So and I believe they're still going today, so that will be 20 years of European funded 3-day-a-week courses, originally called Enterprising Women, then Opening Doors, now Step Into Learning, and they've been a real highlight of the organisation, and we've done enough, and you yourself have very kindly helped us with evaluations, and there have been all sorts of case studies and testimonies and conferences following up after 5 years, after 15 years, to look at the impact that sustained WA learning has had on people's lives, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah. Yes. No, we've got written records.
Written records. It's been great. So that was kind of the culmination of our pre-vocational strand. And also we did community, and then we moved into literacy, because as it became a priority nationally, the WA could bring its own social practice model to the literacy and numeracy field, and we did all sorts of workplace literacy and community-based literacy and numeracy to great effect as well.
which continue.
Which continues.
And if I could just go back, I seem to remember that in those early days, learning how to use a computer was one of the main things that brought people into classes.
It was a carrot, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It was a definite carrot, particularly in rural areas. Certainly for the Enterprising Women course, I remember the first time we had it in Tain, we had 35 show up for 10 places. And there was no getting away from it. They probably hadn't heard of the WA, but they wanted to learn how to use a computer. I remember one woman who was given a place came in and said, "I've just arrived from Africa, I've never seen a computer, can you not help me?" So that's always been, but at the same time, while it was a carrot, we could see the absolute necessity of being able to be digitally aware and how it could be integrated in as a search engine for finding out all sorts of things, as well as, communicating effectively. So it's always been part of that bigger provision. Yeah.
Right. Those are the early days of development, and we have written records of a lot of the things that you've mentioned there. My next question really was to pick up the question about what WEA should be doing or might be doing in the future in Highland, but to ask you this in the context of your recent stint in Aberdeen. Do you know? Have you got which question I'm on there? Which was really one directed at tutor organiser who was in post. So it's quite interesting that you've had this gap. You've reacquainted yourself with WA as it is now. Given those two perspectives, what would you hope that the WEA would be doing, let's say, the next 3 years or so?
Well, we certainly know of its rich past and the legacy it's provided. And I still believe, having, as you say, after 5 years getting back involved with the WA, this time in Aberdeen, believe it has a unique role within the adult learning world. There's no other organisation with a democratic tradition or with such an expansive curriculum that can be as flexible and responsive as the WEA. It's a difficult economic environment, and gone are the days where either central government or local authorities will hire WA staff to, create their magic. That's gone. You hope you'll get some funding, and we are appreciative of all the local authority grants we do receive, because we do help them fulfill their agenda. But we've always got to be looking out for new strands of work. We do have 4 themes, and I'm madly trying to remember all 4. I know health and well-being,
yes.
Arts, culture and heritage,
yes.
That's the second one, employability, and the 4th one is the one I'm toiling with. And I don't know whether it's literacy and numeracy or it's something else.
Okay, that's
anyway, that'll do. I think they do reflect our work, and very often the exciting thing is when you can bring 2 or 3 of those strands together and have an employability project that looks at arts and culture or any other variable. I think we've got to stay true to our roots and to our interest in critical awareness and learning for its own sake. We provide carrots to enthuse learners. We don't provide sticks to force them to come in. Accreditation, I think, travels alongside our provision. At times it's appropriate, and very often our learners appreciate having been given the chance to gain a qualification. But there'll always be WA provision that doesn't have accreditation, and I think it should always remain optional anyway. It's there for learners who want it and for others who don't. As for the next big thing, I can only imagine that we can bring our own unique way of working with learners to the employability agenda, which focuses on personal development, self-esteem, finding your place in the world, and opening doors to new opportunities, and often that might be employment, but that's through a recognition of your own skills and interests and making links and developing networks and finding what's out there. I don't think we want to do anything too traditionally work.
I was just going to come back there, just those things that you've listed there are characteristic of our approach.
Yes.
Rather than the standard.
I think so, and I think we know they can be effective,
yeah.
and I think that's what we can bring to the employability agenda, because there isn't one right answer. So
yes.
I think we want to be given freedom, and I feel in Aberdeen at the moment we've got an employability project, and I think there's an openness, whatever works, and that's what we're bringing to the table, and other providers might bring other things. So we've got to stay true to our roots. We've got to think out of the box. We've got to think across sectors and across curriculum. We've got to work in partnership. It's something we do very effectively, but we might not have all the answers, but by working with a local library or a museum or a community group, we can create something effectively. I was just at a meeting yesterday to see about the WA working in partnership with the university to look at an online training resource for tutors. So I think we maybe don't stand alone always, that we have to find partners who suit us. And above all, we've got to both listen to our learners and people on our committees who are rooted in the communities, because it's got to come from the local area and meet local needs. And I think there are creative responses. It's perhaps a little bit more difficult. Certainly in the Highlands 8 years ago, if we're saying we're listening to the communities and what they need, we were able to respond creatively and effectively to the need for English language provision for our Eastern European migrants. We hadn't predicted that as an avenue for our work 5 years previous to that, but suddenly the need was there, and we worked with other organisations effectively. We found our role, which wasn't going to be a college exam-based role. It was going to be learning about English for everyday life. And so we brought the WA stamp to that provision, and I think we need probably to be looking to see what the current issues. It's interesting politically, perhaps we could be doing a lot more on Scottish culture and Scottish history, about where we are and where we're heading in light of future decisions we'll all be making. I think there's probably an appetite for understanding our own cultural background and where we are and where we want to go. So perhaps that's an area. I don't know. I'm so busy focusing on the here and now, and perhaps not navel gazing enough. I know in the past another one that's worked very well for us, and it could work again, is archaeology. And
yes.
That's been a wonderful, and I'm sure maybe someone will interview Susan Cruzy, who has been a leading light in the Highlands for the WA. She came with an interest and passion for archaeology, and together we were able to create a project which then did so well, and it's then created a new organisation all its own. I will say we're very good at that, at taking an idea, working with people, and then letting it go. Because our way back, we talked at the very beginning of this interview about development education, and it soon became apparent that it wasn't just the WA who shared that interest in development education, and so a new organisation, Highland One World, was created, and that's over 20 years old. We've still got an interest in it, but we launched it free, and that's our job, as we did with the archaeology project, as we did with the Common Thread Sewing Group, the International Women. That's now a fully fledged organisation called Highland Multicultural Friends. They remain loyal to the WA, but our role is to identify a need, work with others, see who's best able to meet that need, and, wave them goodbye if they then become a size where they can operate more effectively on their own. But they're still good partners for the WA.
Yes. In fact, I seem to remember on our visioning day that we were talking about earlier, that was one of the characteristics that the outside people involved in that meeting were saying, in fact, that we were good partners to work with, and this has increasingly become part of our work. This follows on from what you've been saying, which is the direct question: how effective do you think WEA both was and is in meeting its main aims? During your time in the post up in Highland, I think everything you've said so far indicates that, in fact, that's what we've been able to do. How optimistic do you feel in the context of our funding problems about our being able to continue doing that?
Well, number one, we've got to stay true to our ideals. I always was taken with a WA leading light in the north of England who must have said 10 or 15 years ago at a WEA biennial conference, "Win the arguments, the funding follows." Now those words were stated in a more affluent period.
Yes.
But I've always hung on to that. In other words, we can't go in assuming we should be funded or go in groveling, looking for fundings, sort of as a second-class citizen. We create an interest, we assert a need, we galvanize interest, we bring people with us, we work strategically with partners, and I guess I feel it's hard to turn us down in some ways. You've increasingly, I think, and I've noticed this since being back in Aberdeen, more and more funders want you to be able to evidence need or interest. So you've got to do your homework more than you used to. You have to articulate what it is you want to do it, why you should be funded, and create a picture. And then you've got to look at what you hope the impact of that learning will be for people. They want end outputs and outcomes.
Yeah.
And that is the new jargon, but it's also, perhaps it's saying nothing comes free and it's all very well to have good ideas, but let's see that they're rooted in reality and in a community's interest and need, and let's see that they're going to take us somewhere. And that's not just about skills that you can read better or you can effectively, attend a higher education course, but that's also about, I suppose, the viability of a community becoming involved in something and what results that will provide in the future. So they're more than just nuts and bolts there in terms of what it offers, but you've got to be able to create a vision and substantiate it and then follow through on it. It's a tougher world, but it's still possible. And I think, really, there's never been a greater need for people when times are tough. People need to work with others and talk through issues and create alternative systems and setups and organizations who can respond to them. So I think the time is there, the time's important, and I do think with careful scrutiny we will find new opportunities for the WA. They won't be the same ones, and it was ever thus. The WA has changed. I often thought, and when I left, I thought, how would Albert Mansbridge view it if he was to, torpedo into our AGM? Would he recognize the organization? And I think as long as you keep learner-centered provision, learning with a social purpose wherever possible, a democratic governance of the organization, and an interest in lifelong learning, you're still okay.
Okay, well, so you still
I'm
still feel optimistic.
I'm optimistic.
That's good. Okay, the next question is, looking back, do you see changing trends within the work that the organisation does? For example, either in the sort of students we're working with, or the subjects we're offered, or our own policies?
I think we're all in a more bureaucratic age. And I know if you were to ask those working at the WA headquarters how their lives have changed in terms of their work roles over the last 15 years, they would say massively in terms of capturing evidence and following policies and streamlining systems and so all of that's happened, but that's life, and we need to evidence what it is we do and how we do it and ensure that it's quality. So all of those systems are taking more of people's time, and I think the role of the tutor organizer sadly has altered. When I think back those early days when I had those small children and didn't walk away from that job share but decided to take the job on full time, you had more time and you were able to teach and you could organize courses where you wanted, when you wanted. You didn't have to income generate the way you do now, and that's the biggest hurdle for the WEA and for WA staff. It gets in the way of what you want to do and stops you from being as creative as you'd like, or I think as close to communities and to learners as you'd like. You become a manager and others are your frontline staff, and again perhaps there's no way around that. I think you can still be kind of clever and make sure you visit with classes because you're evaluating or you're promoting something or you're field testing or piloting, or there are always ways that you can justify attending classes or even teaching, or you're income generating, but it's a tall order these days. And I think so the financial imperative perhaps is tougher than it used to be, although it's fascinating because several of us in Aberdeen are reading early archival material, and I'm talking 1920s, 30s, 40s, the WEA in the Northeast. And in fun, I think one of the things we're going to do is pull out statements in every annual report relating to the financial difficulties facing the WEA. So I think it's been a common link throughout that we've always operated extremely creatively and effectively, but on the margins of financial security. It's never been easy.
Yes. And what about in terms of the subjects we offered? When you were talking about the early days, you were talking about our philosophy courses, etc., and how important that was for bringing in people onto our committees. Do you see a change?
Well, I'm not so up to date with what's happening locally at the moment. I think as the grant for liberal education has declined over the years, and certainly it had started to before I left, you've got to find other ways of doing it, whether they become fee paying and so they run themselves, or you apply for other kinds of funding that will let you do it, or as in the case with Susan's, we were able to the archaeology create a project in its own right. It does get harder to offer that. I mean, certainly the pendulum is moving towards employability initiatives, which is a shame at the expense perhaps of liberal studies. But there must be ways that we can, or local associations can still fundraise.
Yes.
And really they don't have to cost. If you look at fees coming in, maybe get a free venue, they don't have to cost that much, and yet or you might just do taster sessions and then the group becomes a study group on its own. I think we've got to protect that tradition, as you say, in part to encourage newcomers to the WA. And another way is working in partnership with somebody else to see what you can provide. I mean, our local history days, which were very successful, we had 6 or 8 of them in different communities, late 90s, early 2000s, and they were with Aberdeen University because they could afford to put them on more effectively than we could, but we brought a community element, and they enjoyed that. And they also, at that point, really appreciated our networking and our ability to advertise within communities. So you've got to play to your strengths, and you join partnerships. Sometimes it isn't even monetary input you can provide, but it's your flexibility and it's all your networks that you can bring to it.
So you still feel reasonably
I think
optimistic.
it's harder. I think it
harder,
takes a lot more, and I think committees need to really think long and hard how they might do it, but it's still possible. And I always have found this grant called Awards for All a good one, that you can dress it up. I remember, if I can just put a plug in, our times were tough for us, but I remember back in 2000 we decided to bunch together, and sometimes you can do this, 7 different events in the liberal arts tradition, and we called them a sense of place. So you kind of create a project, but really what it's doing is letting you provide different activities, but it appeals to funders. I remember we got funding for that, and that was a creative writing day under the title Defining a Sense of Place, so that gave them all sorts to focus on. That was a couple of archaeology field trips, and I don't know, there are various other activities, but I think if you badge them under a theme or give them a thematic kind of look, often that appeals to people.
And we did that, didn't we, as part of our contribution to
the Millennium. Was that what it was?
It was our 100 years in, oh gosh.
Was it? No, I think it was. Maybe it was our 100 years.
Was it our 100 years in Scotland?
It was our Celebrating Learning project. It was a Millennium project.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
Millennium, that's right. Yeah.
I think we had over 200 people in total attend those 7 events.
Yes.
And that created a hubbub. I think sometimes out of nothing you've
suddenly got something.
Something.
Yeah. Okay. Ever the optimist, Hilary. Oh. Okay. We're on to the last 3 questions or so now. Do any good stories come to mind, either about students who've done well, significant events, either for individuals or groups, or funny moments? Do you have a particular memory that you'd put into that category? Or you've probably got several. But
well, there's so many times when it was easy to feel heartened and pleased by the fact that WA actually made a difference to people's lives. Certainly every single Step Into Learning Enterprising Women evaluation was very moving.
Yes.
And there were testimonies from learners. They'd had a much more intense involvement, 120 hours maybe, and it had been transformational. And that was extremely rewarding. Another huge satisfaction was watching in various courses learners who then would go full cycle and become tutors.
Yes.
And watching them grow. We had a very good tutor who I believe is being interviewed, Matt Sillers, who taught psychology, and I can think on one hand 3 or 4 of his students that went on to do psychology degrees. And you know, full tribute to him and his encouragement and stimulation and support of them. So it was, that route was amazing as well. Or they become involved in their community, or you hear they've set up a voluntary group in their community because they could see there was a need, and some of that was through discussion. We can't always take the credit, but I think we've been important to giving people the time and space and permission to think about what they want to do, and then the stimulus to act. And So I think there were many, many examples of learners who, or parents or whoever, that actually grew tremendously from their experience, gained in confidence and motivation, and would take risks and go on to further learning or employment. And what that resulted in was particularly because so much of it stemmed from the daytime pre-vocational, we had an old girl network.
Yes, yes.
Because in so many places there were people who'd, I was on a WA course and da-da-da. I remember once in the early days of enterprising women, the local enterprise companies had been recently founded, and they were very insistent we use all their logos. And I remember sending the advertisement to the Oban Times and for a Fort William course, because we did do a lot in Fort William in the early days. And the woman I was dealing with at the Oban Times newspaper said, "Can I just let you in on a little secret? You had the logo upside down, and I attended your course last year, and I've now got a job there, so I sorted it for you." So I thought that was kind of her. But yeah, there were many funny incidents. I'm not so good at remembering them at the moment, but just amusing times where the WA would either be seen as effective or be put in a different light. I remember one time one of the local enterprise companies said to me, "Okay, we'll fund you, but we're not funding adult brownies." And I said, "Oh, well, don't worry, we're not that." But there were, I guess it was the pleasure in seeing the movement develop and take its own life.
Yes.
And, the committees move on and do things themselves. The tutors grow in confidence and do all sorts of things, that it really did spawn a lot of people's interest and development over many years.
Many years. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next question has to do with the role of the organisation in Highlands today. Do you think there is still a role for WEA in Highlands? And if so, how do you see it?
Well, first of all, as I say, I really believe it has a unique position as an adult education provider, as we've talked earlier about being student-centred and open to following student interests. So it's put a marker down for what it can provide. It's a flexible, we fill gaps where others can't go. We respond quickly. We're good partners, and I think partnership is a huge way forward. So we'll hang on to that. We are very good stepping stone in terms of progression.
Yes.
So I think, again, colleges, universities will never be the first step for many learners.
Yes.
And the more we can communicate with other organizations and let them know what we're offering, the more we're on a kind of, pathway for people. Mm-hmm. I think that can be effective. So we're there as part of a whole series of opportunities. Like I say, we fill gaps.
Yes, I don't want you. You've said a lot of this already.
Yeah.
I suppose really, it's asking whether you see that as a role that continues even in straitened economic times.
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so. I think there are areas that are probably underdeveloped. Up here, maybe more focus with museums and the arts. I don't know if we've ever fully exploited that. Bringing our own approach to employability. Elsewhere, they work a lot, reminiscence and the elderly or mental health issues. Health and well-being, I think, is increasingly a big area for the government, and I think the WA could come at that from a variety of angles and be effective for a variety of age groups.
Yes.
Intergenerational work, I think more and more. They do a lot of parenting work in Aberdeen, whether family learning is something we might do. And I don't think the ESOL, the English Second Language provision, is finished.
No.
I think we're on to the next step of that, but I believe there's still vital work to do there.
So you see us having a role still is really, and you feel reasonably optimistic about that. Difficult, but
I think it's difficult, and it's more difficult than when I was imposed. I understand that, but I do think winning the arguments, I hope the funding will still follow.
And last question, what would you like to see WEA do in the next few years? Is that...
I kind of looked at that.
I think so. I think
the health and well-being.
Yes.
I think Scottish politics and history. I think museums and culture. I think our take on employability. It's amazed me that when we started Enterprising Women in 1993, we could see there was a gap. But it amazes me to think 20 years later there's still that need.
Yes.
And I think we're reaching perhaps learners with even greater needs. So I think we'll continue, if we continue to make those arguments, that support and funding should be there. And all credit, I haven't said in this interview, but all credit to our tutors, who are wonderful ambassadors for us at the coalface, work under often difficult conditions. Or I remember somebody had a class in a cloakroom, and somebody, we've had all sorts of environments in which they've helped, but they've been hugely committed and creative. And I think, and all the workers, what a wonderful group of people we've had working for the WEA in Highland too, and what a difference, and we still do, and what a difference that's made, because I think it does come down to people at the end of the day.
Yes.
And I don't think we finished perhaps with rural tourism. That was an area we developed for a few years, and I think that was the idea that creating a tourism communities could be proud of, and in which they were involved. And I'm sure there's still work to be done there.
That brings to mind the potential political changes in Scotland as a whole. Do you see possibilities for us there, or is it dangerous ground?
I don't know enough about what perhaps independence would bring for Scottish education and links within the WEA. Who's to say? I think that is a big issue.
I'm really asking in terms of the referendum, whether you see us having an educational role there.
To play. I don't see why not. I think it wouldn't be our role to take a side.
Oh no,
would it? But
not.
I think it might. That's what I meant about the Scottish politics and history and where we are and where we want to go. I would have thought courses, talks, certainly lunchtime talks, all sorts of events, debates. Let's hope. We've got just over a year. Let's hope there'll be an increasing interest. And yes, I think, as opposed to political parties, we're very well equipped to be able to provide stimulus and debate, or a forum for stimulus and debate on these subjects. And I think that'd be interesting. Great if there'd be a bit of funding for that. I think there are some ideas afloat for that. So fingers crossed that might develop.
Yes, we have been thinking about political literacies.
Yes, of which there is already
There's already
developed.
started a web page. Okay, Hilary, I think I've probably drained you dry. Thank you very much.